So boom. All right. So, okay. So you, Richard, have given me a really good perspective on kind of synthesizing the essence of kind of who I am, because I asked you for it. This is one of the things I always rely upon you for, is a good objective perspective on who I am and why I am. And you kind of talked about my true self and then my not self, right? Which we all have. And you just gave me a really good reflection on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I want to kind of apply the context to we do I do a lot of self-assessment in the context of like a DISC assessment. Everybody knows DISC, right? And a good DISC assessment always produces a result of a natural self and an adapted self. So what are your thoughts on that as you talk about true self versus not self? Is that the space you came from in this context?
Not exactly, not from the space of DISC, but I can see the similarity in the relationship to these binary perspectives. The true self and the not self. We live in a binary world, and there's always this the yin and the yang, the this and the that, that's always going on, and it's very much in the nature of who we are and in everything around us. But so from that context, yes. But in terms of the information itself and the origin of the information, it would be very different.
So I'm just going to bring it out, since as I reflect on myself, because that's all I've got is me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's got their own unique self, but in the context of myself, you've given me some really good perspectives on how, I come across as a natural leader, here to recognize the correct invitation to investigate the values promised through harmonic interactions, where victimization can lead to appeasement and suffering, through patience and active waiting for emotional clarity by securing a solid foundation with proper research. Your creative self-expression is very influential when speaking, when the timing is right. And my consistency in problem solving is dependent on interactions through reasonableness to transform confusion to abundance for the sake of progress. So those words that you put out there, it's like poetry, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the way the words come together and resonate with a message of trueness, right? Of authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as I take it for that, I think it's all of our responsibility to understand who that self is. And you've got a really good process to kind of draw that out, the by design process and everything. And I think my experience with you, Richard, is you've conditioned yourself to be able to allow kind of like an inspired perspective on other people, like you provided for me in the context of my true self, right?
Mm-hmm.
How have you done that? What's happened to you in your life that's allowed you that capability?
Throughout my life, I've always been a seeker. Seeking for what? I would only imagine it's been myself, and to understand, how this world works. And I came across, many different practices, religious and spiritual practices that I've encountered along my journey. I then came into human design, which is the study of understanding how the world works, how everything works around us. And through this practice and continued studies with it, and not only the studies, but the implementation of implementing these practices and these discoveries about what it is to be myself, and the strategies that's necessary, that's built into my DNA and so on, gave me this new lease on life, basically, a whole new understanding of who I am, how I make decisions, how I navigate my life, how I'm intended to do that. And when I practice these ways, oh my God, it's my life has changed over the years, like you can't believe it. And as I share this with other people, I witness the same thing. The stories that they share back with me as well, like, oh my God, my life has changed. And at the beginning, it can come across as, oh, it's nonsense. It's woo woo. How can your birth data time of birth or, place of birth and these things. How can that tell you everything about my life? But, the thing is, we're in a whole different time in history now. And we have the capability and the capacity to understand energy and how energy works, and we are energetic beings. And so this technology of human design really goes deep into that and understanding how we operate as energetic beings and how we're intended to meet, how we're intended to come together and share our knowledge, share our wisdom, share our gifts and skills. And as we can see, the world is in great turmoil in terms of how we've been doing that in such ways that there's great division and so on. But at the end of the day, it's still part of the process. This is all part of the process of progress. And as crazy and devastating as it may look and seem, it's still pushing us, leading us into progress.
What a wonderful optimistic perspective. What did I use the word brilliant, like, which means light, and as I consider, just to reflecting on what you say, we're in a unique period right now. And I think that there's always been uncertainty throughout history and turbulence and everything. At the same time, there's, I don't know how else to say it except dark. There's like a darkness, if you want to
Mhm.
call it that. I don't want to get
Well,
again all spiritual and woo
well,
woo.
that's a appropriate word.
Right. So in the context of darkness, it's funny when I think about you and back to this synthesis of myself and the true self versus the not self, right? It's the this one and that one. It's the dark, it's the light, right? I think it's the awareness of how two things come together to make a whole, just like you and I are coming together right now to make
Mhm.
a whole message. I like to think, again,
Mhm.
without an agenda. I mean, this is the thing, I've known you for years, and my experience with you is that I, if my agenda is coming from this place, from a place of authentic respect and love, then there's a juice that comes from our conversations, just like it's happening right now. And
Mhm.
as we apply that toward the reality of the condition of darkness and brilliance and both of them coming together, a lot of people are grasping for solutions, whether it be, again, numerology, you know, astrology, and I had my first numerology reading as a human being probably about 15 years ago in my life, and it was profound.
Mhm.
And I was hesitant. I'm like, well, I'm a businessman, I can't
Mhm.
take this stuff seriously,
Mhm.
But it was like, how could this be known about me, right? And then I think, I mean, when your work, by the way, how do you confront that? We talk about pragmatic business and, oh, we got to get this done. There is no place for this numerology and this woo woo stuff. I mean, where is the balance of that in the context of pragmatic profit based business and getting things done and getting results, and then bringing in what you and I think believe to be the truth and the essence of reality? How do you balance
um,
that?
how do you balance? Just clarify that question again for me, please.
So an illustration is, I deal with business leaders on all day long on a regular basis,
Hmm.
and the initial context of the agenda is results. We want results. We want
Right.
top line revenue, bottom line profit. How are we going to do that and everything? And we can very quickly, I don't know if it's ascend or descend into a place of, science, kind of like pragmatic science. Okay, we got to do this. We got to put a business plan in place. We got to have a strategy. We got to deploy it. We got to execution. We got to lead people. We got to build teams. So there's kind of a construct, right? But then there's also the unseen, right? The essence of the human, right? That
Hmm.
from my perspective, and this is one of the things I think you and I have in common, is that is really our force and our power. It's the light, which right now, as I look around, I see light all the time. I mean, everywhere I am, even if it's a dark room, but I can still see through it, there's light in that room, right? So as we illuminate into the reality of effectiveness, when it comes to being a human being and applying that effectiveness into a business construct, which requires pragmatic, scientific, strategic approaches and everything. How do you balance that? It's almost cynicism around, oh, Chris, I don't have time for numerology. I don't have time for this. But when you know that that's really the truth of the reality and the essence of who we are, how do you balance that?
Okay, got it. Um, you know, again, as part of this uh, binary or polarity or duplicity that we live in this world, there are these two things. There's this the pragmatic, the logic. It's got to be logical. It's got to be a pattern that we can see that repeats itself. That we can trust. That it's science based. It's mathematical based. It's pragmatic. It's logical. You know, but there's that aspect of our existence, and the other side of it is the abstract. The in the clouds. The dreamer, the thinker, the coming up with the ideas that it doesn't exactly have a practical you know grounding to it yet, but it's the ideas. But everything comes out of ideas, right? And then we make sense of it. Then we can see the pattern in it. So it's these two polarities coming into balance, but they're both necessary. It's part of our existence. And so I guess Steve Jobs can tell you about that. He came up with these ideas, and then boom, it had to be practical. And I'm sure he'd been considered woo woo, and for his use of certain hallucinogens to really help his ideas and stuff. That's all abstract stuff. But there's a practical side to it of how you can make sense of all of that. It comes to us. So I don't know if that's answering your question. It's
Well, yeah, I mean, so let me just reflect the answer you just gave me in the context of
mhm,
Steve Jobs. I mean, inducing substances, right,
mhm,
to change the state, right?
mhm.
Is that the solution?
No, not necessarily, but for some, maybe. I mean, there's no set solution, or answer for everybody. There's no one size fits all. Certain things works for certain people, certain things, don't. You know what I mean? And but what I'm really referring to are these two, the abstract and the logic, these two polarities that exist for us, and they meet somewhere in the middle. They have to meet with some sort of a knowing, that's in the middle of it, that balances these two things together. But we can't exist without them. It's what it's how we exist here with the abstract thinking and the logical thinking. But they tend to fight against each other. The abstract can be viewed as the more spiritually thinking, and the logic is more the scientific based thinking.
So let
But
me
they
reflect. Let me just reflect on what you're saying,
Mhm,
because this is kind of coming to me while we're talking. Back to the pragmatic businessman. And we got to get things done. And many of us go into our day with, you know, an agenda, a plan. We have a to-do list and everything. What I'm understanding, what I think I understand, and then you're a really good reflection of that, is that it's about awareness around the other component that is not as easy for us to consider, which is in this context, it's the other component of more of a, I mean, call it an alternative perspective, right? If you've got a business person that's just focused on following the strategy, and that's a legitimate component. But then there's also the other side, the other angle of, whatever you want to call it, essence, being. People find that essence, I think, through meditation. Through
spiritual practices. Yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
But it's
It's you
so,
can't touch it. It's ethereal.
right,
It's
and it's
it's
right, but that's hard to do when I got a board who's breathing down my neck to make bottom line results, or I'm out of a job. I mean, how do you create a condition in people's hearts and psychologies where they're aware of what is oftentimes ignored because they just don't have the mental capacity or the bandwidth to acknowledge it?
well, there are some people that are more wired, who are wired with more abstract thinking. The way they're wired, they live more into that world. And there's some people who live more in a world of very pragmatic, very logical, and you bring these two people together, and it's hard for them to see each other. And there are those people as well who have a balance of both. So the idea is like really recognizing that, that we, when you're bringing this into a work environment, for example, and you have these two opposite kinds of thinkers. One that's more abstract, the idea people, they come up with, whatever to, for the business. And you have the more numbers and nuts and bolts people, and you bring them together and they don't see eye to eye. Well, and there are those in the middle, maybe you have the leader who's got a mix of both, and able to bridge the two together. That's what it really takes. It really takes to understanding that we're all different and we have different sort of wirings. And, it's not a question of competing against each other, but it's a question of how do we bring these differences, to make a whole. How do you bring the sum of the parts to create a whole, a functional whole, instead of, pitting them against each other?
Right. And as I apply this toward the condition of the world that we're in, I think the condition that, again, this is my experience, as we're in this global pandemic and this division and everything, I think the condition, this is based on my experience, is that we're kind of forced into one side. It's like, oh God, I've got to be extremely this way, or I've got to be, extremely focused on business results, or I'm going to stop doing that and then be extremely focused on, physical fitness, emotional fitness and wellness and everything. And I get the impression from just this brief conversation that it's a function of, I don't know how else to say this, but kind of forcing the balance when we're compelled to be extremely one way, to actually be, first of all, stop, be conscious of the fact that there is an alternative, and to look at it and maybe welcome those alternative perspectives and embrace them, even though they may be woo-woo or whatever you want to call it. I mean, you and I are both a couple woo-woo guys, I think, in that context, in a good way, right? It's light, it's brilliance, it's illumination. So maybe as we kind of come to a conclusion, and as we apply ourselves in the real world, looking at ourselves, whether it be through a DISC personality assessment or a by design assessment, which you do so well, is not being afraid of that. Because the world, I think, as we look at extremes, is conditioning people to be afraid of the other side, right? Be afraid of the darkness, It's the yin and the yang, right? I think that we can't really understand ourselves unless we are aware of the shadow, if you want to call it that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. We live in a homogenized world, and it's either you go this way or you go that way. It's either this or that, and it's always this competing against each other. And we're not going to get out of that. That's just the way it is, and it's great. It's great for business, However, we are conscious beings. We are beings that we have this ability for a self-reflected consciousness, and so awareness is really the name of the game, really. And the more we become aware of these qualities of what's going on, when we can step back and really witness what's going on, then we have a better opportunity to integrate, because we are holistic beings. We're living in this holistic world. There's so many things to integrate. You can't just say that, I'm going to take care of my business and focus on my business, and then, how many people do that? They focus on their business and their world of, business, and then they make zillions of money, and their health is to shit, and they have to spend that money on enormous amounts of money on fixing their health and their psychological being, and all kinds of diseases and stuff that's erupting out of these ways of being. They haven't been living in a more of a holistic sense. It's been either one way, or some who just focus just on spirituality, and they forget the other part. And it's just, we're holistic beings, is what I'm trying to say. And it's a matter of integrating all of these pieces together so that we can really honor each other and be more respectful of these unique gifts that each and every one of us have. It's not all the same. It's varied. And so when we come together and creating these new ways of, I believe, of creating businesses today, small businesses especially, it requires a way of bringing these functionality into it. You know, how can we bring these energies together that's right, you know, the right amount of beings in the right way, so that we can, you know, honor each other's differences and the unique gifts that we're bringing to the table, and how can that be managed and guided in a correct way.
Right.
It requires awareness. It requires, you know, a new way of seeing and doing things, way of thinking.
And just to use your word, I think you kind of in summary, it's about being homogenous, right? Call it homogeneous or whatever you want to call it. You know, it's that integrated whole, considering all aspects of the essence of who we are, right?
Well, holistic in that sense, holistic, bringing all of the different components of a holistic being into some sort of, you know, working unit, as opposed to separated, you know, as
Cool.
as many people operate.
All right. And I'm always, I mean, I myself am challenged to do that every day. Again, the balance of, you know, the
Well,
force
that's,
of all that productivity and pragmatism with being
mhm.
holistic and being balanced. So, yeah,
Well, that's the name of the game. It's a life journey. You know, we're on this, you know, hero's journey to bring it all together and share this with each other, and find the best way of how we can come into the community and do this. You know, it's a challenge, and especially with what's going on, the phase that we're in at this particular time in collective history.
so you, by the way, so you just hit something for me. Um, so we're recording this. Obviously, it's being
Mhm.
recorded. It's candid, open, not agenda-based conversation. I want to do
Great.
more of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
We're supposed
but
to do that.
at this point, I want to kind of leave it. And then I think our next topic, I'd love to be able to maybe get together with you here in a couple days and just kind of bring these components together. Is maybe
Hmm.
discuss what the hero's journey is. What the heck is a hero's journey? And maybe we ought to talk about that next time. Okay?
Okay, sure.
Because I mean, there's a whole Pandora's box of Joseph Campbell and what that means and how that's about and applying that toward the reality of our condition. So I love these conversations, Richard. Uh,
Hmm.
you inspire me, and
Well,
as
thank you,
we come
man.
into
I feel
this
the same way
space.
about you, Chris. Yeah,
Thank you, thank you.
absolutely. And I love your questions as well. You know, you're really good at that. And yeah, I'd love to talk more about human design and stuff. You know, as we go along in these candid sessions, we can call them.
Sounds good. All right, until next time.
Alrighty.